Hi everyone, it's Shari here today, and I'm going to be making this fun Easter card with some chocolate rabbits and an ink blended sky. So I'm going to be using the extra special Easter stamp set you see here. This is an older stamp set, but I really love the little chocolate rabbits. I'm also going to be using the largest of the outside in stitched Easter egg stackables. So I've cut a piece of Nina Solar White cardstock with that largest egg that you see there on the right. I'm also going to be using some of the Gotta Have gingham for my background pattern paper. I wanted a nice soft pastel look to this card. So I'm going to pick out the yellow and I'm going to go with the orthogonal print there rather than the diagonal. I'm using the largest of the outside in stitched rectangles, and I like to line that up with my pattern so that it's nice and centered in that rectangle when it's die cut. So I'll just hold that in place with a little bit of washi tape and run it through my die cut machine. And there you see the pattern is nice and centered in that rectangle. When this is layered on a standard A2 size card base, it'll make a nice little border of the card base around the outside. Now to create my chocolate rabbits here, I've got some chocolate bar cardstock, and I'm just going to white emboss these. And I'm actually going to use the smooth side because this cardstock has a textured side as well. So I'm using my anti-static powder tool to remove any static from the paper. I'm going to ink that little rabbit up with some Versamark ink, stamp him down, and then this is Lawn Fawn white embossing powder that I'm using here. So once I've got that on there and the excess shaken off, I'll just heat it with my heat tool and melt that embossing powder. Once he's all embossed, I'm going to use the coordinating die to cut him out. And since I've got some dark cardstock here, I'm just going to use some colored pencil just to color in a couple of the details. So I'm using a pink Prismacolor pencil here. I believe it is blush pink. And I'm just coloring in the color of his ear. And then I've got a yellow one here as well that I'm going to color in the bow. I'm also going to go in with a white pencil and just color his tail as well. Now I'm going to add these stitched clouds to this egg. So I've got it face down on the stitched cloud die, and I'm just going to hold it in place nice and straight with just one little piece of washi tape just so it doesn't move as I run it through my die cut machine. So now I have this nice sort of stitched detail in my background. I'm using some Distress Oxide inks to create a blended sky and some little fingertip sponge daubers. I'm using Squeezed Lemonade and Tattered Rose. And I don't need to put any ink at the very bottom because I'm going to cover that up with some paper to create some grass. So I'm not inking all the way to the bottom, but I'm starting with the Squeezed Lemonade towards the bottom of my sky and the Tattered Rose on top. The Distress Oxides go on nice and thick, and they're really easy to blend together. So I'm going to go back in with my Squeezed Lemonade, and you can see where the two colors cross and start to create sort of an orangey look between the pink and the yellow. So you just got to work with it until you get the look that you want. I was going for sort of a pastel-y sunset type sky. Now, to add a little more detail, I'm using the starry colors of the Gansai Tambi watercolors here. And I'm just using the white gold there at the end, so it's just a white shimmery watercolor. And I'm just going to paint in the clouds. So I feel like that color of the Distress Oxide still shows through. It's not bright white, but it gives it a little shimmer and a little bit of contrast from the sky. And depending on how thick you want this paint, just depends on how much water you add. Some I did a little thicker and others I thinned out a little bit. I'm trying not to put too much water because I put this ink on Nina cardstock rather than watercolor paper, so I don't want to get too wet. And these ones at the bottom, I wasn't sure if they were going to show above the grass because I'm not really sure where my grass is going to fall, so I just went ahead and painted those in as well. And I just hit it with my heat tool just to kind of dry it a little faster, but you could also let it air dry. Now for my grass, I've got the green plaid from the Perfectly Plaid Spring paper pad, and I'm just going to cut the bottom of my egg shape. And then I've got the grassy border die, the straight one. This is the first one, the oldest one that we have, and I'm just going to cut a straight little grass border on here. Now I've got a piece of vanilla malt cardstock, and I'm just going to put this inked up egg on top of it just to give it a little more stability and to make it kind of thick like a chipboard cutout sort of thing. Because I'm going to put this flat on my card base, I'm not going to pop it up, but this will give it a little bit of height just from the thickness of the cardstock. Now I can add my grass, and I'm using the glue tube to do that. That way this liquid glue, I can kind of shift it around, make sure it lines up. And now I'm going to add my Gotta Have Gingham panel to my card base. And I started with a white card base at the beginning, but I actually liked the way this yellow gingham looked on a vanilla malt cardstock card base, so that's what I'm using here. And I started with some paper bag cardstock and made the Easter basket with the eggs, but I actually did not like the way that looked, so I ended up just doing the other bunny. And like I said, this is the paper bag cardstock, so I'm going to have like a milk chocolate bunny and a dark chocolate bunny. So the one in the background will be a little lighter, but it gives them a little contrast from each other. So the same thing here, I just inked him up with the Versamark ink, stamped on there after using my static tool, added the white embossing, and then I'm just going to heat set that and melt that white embossing powder. And I'm going to do the same thing with him, add a little pink to his ear. I went back and did the noses, and I'm going to color his bow a different color. So I've got a aqua colored pencil here, and I'm just going to color in the bow on that, just so they're a little bit different from each other. And of course I did his tail as well. Now I've got this curved banner that I cut out with the die out of that vanilla malt cardstock. I'm just folding the ends in as they're supposed to be, making sure my creases are good. And this is where I'm going to put my sentiment, right along the bottom. I like how this off-white and the game all sort of blend together and makes the egg part of the card really stand out. I'm using the Happy Easter sentiment from the new Some Bunny set, just because it fit inside the banner better. And I'm mounting it on my block with the banner underneath so I can kind of get the curve right, and then I can flip it over and stamp it. I'm using the Peachy Keen ink just to sort of match my background a little bit better. And now I can finish assembling my card. So I'm just going to glue on this egg panel, this little scene that I've created. Center that up on my card. And I actually sat a block on it just while I was getting my adhesive on my other things. It did not sit there very long. I'm going to add some thin foam squares to this dark chocolate bunny. He's going to be in the foreground, so I'm just going to pop him up just a little bit. These are half the thickness of normal foam squares. And then I'm going to use the liquid glue from the glue tube for the other bunny, because I'm going to glue him right on the back, and I'm actually going to tuck him behind some of this grass. So since I didn't put the glue all the way up on the grass, I can tuck him behind the blades on the top. And then my other bunny can go right in front. He's popped up a little bit, and you can see how that contrast between the two colors of brown really looks good. Now for my little banner, I did the same thing. I added some of those little foam squares to the inside, and then on those two little flaps that are going to lay more flat, I'm just adding glue dots. So I'm going to line it up. They're sticking to my fingers. So I'm going to line it up, and I'm going to press down the center first, and then I'm going to take my tweezers and make sure that those little tails are tucked in and get those glue dots stuck down. And there is the finished card. So here's another look. I really like the way that blended background turned out. Thanks for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye.